Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Exec Scrutiny Board on the 7th of April 2026. Are there any apologies? I think we have a full house. It's good to see. Item 2, late items, there are none. Item 3, are there any declarations of interest? No? Okay, thank you. Item 4, minutes of the meeting held on the 16th of March 2026. That was attached. Is there any notes, comments on that? Are we okay? Okay, thank you. Item 5 is the forward plan standing item, as we all know. I'm not aware of anything new that's appeared on this since our last meeting, so I assuming there's nothing that we want to take a closer look at this stage. Okay, thank you. Moving swiftly on to item 6, which I think Alex is going to deal with, which is the Overview and Scrutiny Forward Plan 25-26.
Thank you, Chair. This is the standing item that comes to this board that provides a summary of the work programmes for the Council's 5 scrutiny review boards and is a means by which this board can refer items or request that items are brought here for additional scrutiny. As members will note, we are coming towards the end of this current municipal year, and work programmes are typically refreshed in the early part of the municipal year, so we're due to start that cycle again shortly. That being said, there is nothing that precludes this board from recommending items for scrutiny in the early part of the next municipal year in order to make the best use of the meetings that we have available to us. So, Chair, over to the board to make any recommendations.
Thank you. There is a meeting of Overview and Scrutiny chairs pending. It was moved through because of the all-councillor update on the Darley incident. So I'm looking forward to that because I think that will give us an opportunity to discuss the work programme this year, how it's gone, any thoughts, feedback, but also trying to encourage or strongly encourage that all the boards hit the ground running in the next municipal year. What we can't afford is a lag between the first couple of meetings, sort of trying to find some work programmes and some topics. Okay, throughout the year, that is inevitable that things will crop up. We want to try and preempt a work programme to a degree so that everybody can get to scrutiny from the very first meeting and be very proactive. So that's something which I'd like to discuss with the chairs in due course, and I think a meeting is probably in the diary already. If not, it will be soon. Thank you, Councillor Wright.
Sorry, did you mean the Frygate incident rather than the
Sorry, what did I say? Darling. Apologies. The Frygate incident. Yes, sorry, Councillor Wright. Yes, so at this stage, late into the municipal year, I don't think it's appropriate really for us to be recommending anything back to them, but obviously on that context there will be some discussions about the forthcoming municipal year. Thank you, Alex. Okay, so moving on to item 8, which is send an alternative provision. Okay, over to you. Councillor Hazelgrave? Yes. Oh. Would you like to introduce it at all, or do you want straight into the discussion?
Sorry, Chair. I think we're at the stage where we are waiting for a definitive report which goes into all the processes that led to the request, urgent request for extra funds to complete the capital works to make that school open in September. The reason being that time was of the essence. We wanted our SEND pupils who would benefit from that new school to be able to take up those places from September. It was the right place for them, it would be the right place for them for their education, and it would also be close to home. Should that not have opened, that school not have opened, or if that school does not open, because it's for September this year, then that would mean we would need to find places at fairly short notice, and they would not necessarily be close to home. So that would be not ideal. And we'd like to make sure that we have provision for all our SEND pupils, in fact, for all our pupils, not people without SEND or with SEND or EHCPs, to go to the right place for them when they continue their education 16 plus. We know that during the works, it was discovered that some issues of planning had not been taken, they had not taken regard of certain planning issues which were stipulated in the granting of the preparation of the building for it to run as a substantive and established school. That meant that we needed to get those extra funds approved by the leader of the council as an urgent decision, and that the decision would come to scrutiny. I don't think there would be a lot of quibble by the Executive Scrutiny Committee, but it's for them to judge about the fact that we did take that action and did get that approval. It may be the circumstances leading up to that. We don't have in front of us a full report at this time, but we shall. So, I mean, I think Sharon Buckby and I are quite happy to answer questions insofar as we are at the moment in this, but with the understanding that there will be a much more detailed kind of there'll be much more detailed insight for the Executive Committee when this report is actually tabled.
Thank you. Yeah, just to add some context to that, obviously as exec chair, occasionally I'm asked to waive a call-in on urgent decisions, and this was one of those occasions. Now, obviously, given that it was a very significant budget increase, very reluctant to do that, but obviously in the circumstances, I felt that it was the right thing to do, because obviously we need to make sure that the provision, which is the most important part of this, was in place for the new term. However, the caveat that I put into place, which I think was a very important one, was that we would scrutinise this and ensure that lessons were learned on the process. Now, I thank you for this interim discussion that we've got now, and there may be a few questions. I did have some questions, but actually on reflection, it's probably more flipped to recommendations, really, to feed into that process, which I'll sort of present shortly. But it is important that we do have that open and honest report in due course back to us, or whoever's chairing this and the members. It may change, it may not, who knows. But whoever's here needs to have a proper look at that and obviously ensure that the council has learned lessons and can avoid this kind of huge budget increase in the past. The point needs to be made as well that it's not necessarily even that we would have reduced the overall cost in hindsight, because that cost might have been always there, but it's how we discover that so that the budget can be properly provided for, and there's no need for these urgent decisions to be made, and that is something which I think we need to learn lessons from. Yes, do you want to?
Thanks, Chair. Like everybody else, I mean, I was alarmed when I saw the amount of the increase, and raised it with the Cabinet member at the time, and was satisfied with the response. And I'm just pleased to see that there is that provision in that the deep dive, if you like, into the lessons learned has been put in place, and look forward to having sight of that report in due course.
Councillor Bolton.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I echo what Councillor Bonser has just outlined. Is there any firm timeline on recommendation 2.2? I mean, I'm pleased lessons are being learned, but when are we going to be, or when will the new committee be getting the report? So,
good question. I've got one of my sort of bullet point recommendations that I believe that we should be looking to have the full action plan or the report back to this board no later than June. I think that's a reasonable few weeks, if that's something which I can put forward with the other bullet points. Is that okay? Do we have any other questions at this stage? So, to hopefully assist the process, some of this may have been covered, because obviously we're not privy to the discussions that are still ongoing. And I'll email this recommendation if board agrees to you. So it's to request that the final lessons learned report specifically addresses why the planning, fire and ventilation and noise insulation requirements were not quantified earlier in the £0.8 million estimate, and whether mandatory early involvement of planning/heritage/building control officers will now be required for all future school capital feasibility work, and consider if every capital project of this nature should include written sign-off from planning and building control on feasibility before any budget is set, and a ring-fence contingency for regulatory/planning condition risks on refurbish conversions is necessary. And then the recommendation that we've just discussed, that these final lessons in the report is brought back to this board no later than June 2026. Would that be reasonable? It may be quite, I mean, I'm expecting most of those, if not all of them, will be covered in one form or another by the report, but I think it would be, having thought about it, hopefully be a positive contribution to the process. We agreed on that? Okay, any against? Okay, it's carried. So I'll email that to you. Okay, well, thank you very much for that. Oh, sorry, Councillor Hesselgrave.
Thank you, Chair. I think that set of recommendations is very helpful to me in terms of the way that the future capital amount is spent, and that, you know, mistakes have been made here. We'll find out the detail later. I think we know the general direction, but having that kind of protocol for the way any future designs are signed off is really helpful to make sure it stays within the envelope and we get maximum use of government money. It's not our money really, but it's ring-fence for work to help improve the offer for SEND children within the city. Yeah, so that's helpful, and I think that's a really good way to go forward. Thank you.
And it may be actually, this is probably more for Cabinet to consider, there may be some nuances there that they may want to just alter, but thrust of that, hopefully they can accept. There may be some technicality an officer may give them, but hopefully they can at least embrace most of that and agree it, so that we can feed positively as a board into the process. So thank you for your attendance, and look forward to seeing you again with the completed report, and we can discuss it in more detail. Thank you. Okay, moving on then, is the Council Cabinet agenda. Quite a beefy one. We move to the recommendations. Okay, didn't seem to be in our Executive Scrutiny Board. Oh, sorry, have I tell you what I've missed is item 7, which is Council Cabinet responses to scrutiny recommend. I knew I'd missed something. Councillor, let's just go back to item 7. The recommendations were all refused. I missed that, sorry. Okay, moving on then to the Council Cabinet agenda. So, if we start on key decisions, which is item 8, which is best start in life strategy and best start family hubs. Is it yourself, Gamal? No, sorry, I do apologise.
It's okay. I'm Fiona Colton and I'm Head of Early Help Services, and I'm the Senior Responsible Officer for the Family Hub project. And really it's just to note and accept the additional funding that we're receiving from the 1st of April from the Department for Education and the Department of Health and Social Care, which is 5.192 million over the 3 financial years. And just to gain approval and acceptance of the funding, and to be sure that if we don't spend it all, that we can move it into reserves to prevent any clawback. It's very rare that we don't spend it all, but sometimes delays to recruitment and other things may mean that we're not as quick with spending the money. And really to make sure that obviously Andy Smith has the strategic responsibility, delegated authority to ensure that the funding is spent most appropriately.
Thank you. Do we have, so Councillor Wright and Councillor Kerr?
Yeah, no, just
sorry, could you just press your mic off, please? Thank you.
Yeah, just for clarity, it appears that this strategy is 100% funded by central government. So do I take it if the funding stops for whatever reason, the project stops?
Not really. So Family Hubs grew out of formerly Sure Start local programmes, children's centres. So there's still a core-based budget that pays for staff that deliver activity. So some aspects of the delivery would stop. However, a lot of the work is just where we've creatively used our staff to deliver in a different way. So there would always be something still in place. Perhaps not as much.
Councillor Kerr?
Some people may know that there's an early years project on the coming forward to look at some of our most challenged nursery schools, and some of them in these areas. And I just wondered how the family hubs were going to be integrated, their activities are going to be integrated into that support for some of our nurseries, as a first question. And the second thing is, having a nice list here is useful, and it reminds me that there are challenged and challenging families in all parts of the city, and some parts of the city are some distance from a hub offer. And I just wondered what we were doing to be able to offer support to those families.
Okay, perhaps if I start with your first question. So, as a family hub service, an early help service, we sit as part of the early years strategy group. So all of the work that looks at supporting different aspects of early years in the city is part of our core role. And we work quite closely with a number of nursery schools across the city, particularly Harrington. And we're just looking at a couple of projects with them. So I think we're always within the mix as far as what things that we can support with. Part of the plan for this coming year in the Best Start in Life plan is to look at a programme called Early Talk Boost, which focuses on working with providers, so schools, early years providers, around delivery of really early speech and language delivery. So some real techniques around how our providers work with children to ensure that they have that opportunity to enrich their language. Alongside that, we run a lot of programmes for parents that will complement that. So not the same programme, Early Talk Boost, quite technical and focused on our partners, so deliverers, and then some of the things that we run for parents are more straightforward around acquiring, good language acquisition and those sorts of things. So we are absolutely linked in via the early years strategy. Yeah, it's a challenge. There are areas in the city that we're well aware of where there are elements of vulnerability, deprivation. The beauty of the family hubs is it's not a postcode lottery anymore. So any family can access any family hub service across the city. So we're also trying to look, and we had a lovely event at Quad last week around our perinatal and infant-parent relationships, mental health, where a lot of parents were saying they'd prefer to come into the city centre to come to activities. So whilst we've got Beckett and we've got Derwent, which are not that far away, they were still saying that places like Quad, Dada and other venues, at which point my staff grew, because then Fiona's thinking, okay, let's look at where else we can go. So we're trying to look at as many community venues. What I have to balance is the capacity, that if we're delivering in a lot more community venues, we won't have the capacity to deliver in the hubs. But I absolutely believe that we should be able to pick up and lift our family hub offer and deliver it anywhere. You're welcome.
Thank you. Councillor Bonser?
Thanks, Chair. Yes, I'd just like to welcome and support, obviously, the acceptance of these monies into the system. Very much in favour of these hubs. They're very valuable for all city members, all city residents and families. And I'm saying this as the grandmother of an 8-week-old, my first grandchild, who actually lives in your ward, Chair, but has attended the Beckett Hub, where she's received excellent support, and I'd be grateful if you would pass that on in terms of development and breastfeeding support and so on. So I'm all for it, Chair. Thank you.
No, congratulations.
Thank you.
You don't look old enough. Councillor Cecile Wright.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I also welcome this excellent strategy. I just wanted some indication of how the family hub links with the family and poverty strategy for the city. Thank you.
I sit on the poverty strategy group and work really closely with Jane and her team around the resilience fund and with the food banks and everything else. So we try to link in wherever possible. And part of the Best Start in Life strategy guidance tells us that as part of our Best Start in Life plan, which once I've been to Cabinet, I'll be ready to publish, and we do link in to make sure that all of those aspects are there.
Thank you. Any further questions, queries, comments? No? I think the board can welcome this continued funding, if we can agree that. Thank you. Send that to Cabinet. Okay, thank you. Okay, item 9, Darley Mills Bridge update. Verna, are you going to lead on this one?
Yes, Chair, thank you. As committee members know, there are 3 bridges really involved in this area. So there is the original Mills Bridge, which we know is an unstable condition and is currently owned by default by Crown Estates. There's the Walters Walkway, which was an interim bridge which unfortunately had to be closed at the end of last year because of erosion of the riverbank. And then there is the third potential bridge, which is, and we released the strategic outline business case of a potential new replacement bridge earlier this year. So to be able to reinstate that interim bridge, the Walters Walkway, we do need to demolish the Mills Bridge, the original bridge. And to do that in a timely way, we would like to do that this summer. So this report seeks approval to progress that action and to take it so that we can reconnect this part of the city across the River Derwent. It includes serving notice on Crown Estate as set out in 8.1, which would start the process of taking ownership of that Mills Bridge by the council. And with the appropriate delegations to do that, including a delegation to start the process of planning permission to secure that demolition as well. Now, we know that the condition of that Mills Bridge has been declining since it was closed, and our understanding from professional advice is that if we don't intervene, it is very unlikely to withstand another winter. What we must do, therefore, is to ensure that we manage that in a safe and controlled way, not simply just allowing it to collapse into the river. And we've been working with a demolition expert to ensure that we understand as best as we can how that could be carried out safely, both for the public and for the contractors themselves, and with an estimate of the cost of that. So this report asks for approval to accept EMCA funding to support the demolition and to bring the project into our Sustainability Investment Programme, which is another report bringing to you today. Unfortunately, we were not able to note this in the document because of report timings, but the EMCA Transport and Digital Committee, which was held on the 2nd of April, has made a recommendation of £2 million capital funding to specifically support the demolition of the old bridge. There does remain a financial risk, however, I should bring that to your attention, because that recommendation, that committee doesn't decide. It has to make a recommendation to the full EMCA board, and that won't happen till June. However, we do anticipate that that £2 million cost of demolition, we could manage that through funding in our Sustainability Investment Programme, where funding has already been agreed, without there being a knock-on from consequences of movement in that funding. And finally, at the same time as doing all these other things, we're trying to really concertina this process, bring actions together. We are progressing, bringing that business case for a permanent replacement. And that's all, Chair.
Thank you. Can I, before I just open this up, so on EMCA then, so what assurances do we have? I mean, I know there's a recommendation to the main board, the EMCA board, who we are hoping will approve the £2 million in June, and the report calls the risk low. I've been through this, many of us have been through this kind of process before in various bodies similar. So if you were a betting person, you'd probably say that it's likely to be agreed. However, there is a risk that it isn't. So what is the alternative if EMCA doesn't approve the funding? You know, what schemes potentially would lose out as a result of that, or where would the money come from alternatively?
I suppose the first thing I would say from an assurance point of view is that we, our officers like Nigel work very closely with EMCA officers, so they understand the project and they have been very supportive of it. The Mayor has been very supportive of it. And what happened at the March EMCA board, there was an approval of an amount of funding to develop that strategic outline business case. Now, we can't put that permanent bridge replacement until the old one has gone. So, there's a phased process here, which EMCA is certainly supporting. But I'll hand over to Nigel for how we manage it if we didn't get that, which I do think is a very low risk.
There we go. I think, first of all, just reiterating a little bit of what Verna said, the March committee released guaranteed funding over the next 3 years of up to 2.5 million for development of not just the business case, but design, etc., of the permanent works. So EMCA are very supportive of the permanent works for the bridge. As part of that project, demolition of the existing bridge has always been part of that. What's happened with the deterioration is that we're having to bring that forward. So we would originally have had a project where we'd do the business case, etc., arrive on site, demolish the old one, put in a new one. Now, because of the risk to the old bridge, we're having to bring forward the demolition, but it's just part of the same project. So they're backing that and supportive. In terms of if the money didn't come, then we have other allocations from EMCA across the programme and some carryover from last year, which we could negotiate with EMCA, and they're very open to this dialogue in terms of how we reallocate that. Now, obviously, if you've got a sum of money and you've got a programme to do things, which you'll see in the other report, if you take money out of it, you're going to do less. But the nuance with it is about changing the timings of some of those projects. So we don't necessarily do less, but there are programmes where we don't need to get into contract until the back end of this year. So we can sort of take some money out and then negotiate our way through that with EMCA. The interesting thing to understand about the EMCA investment programme is it's a live programme. So although we've got an allocation for 3 years, as things change, as things develop, it's a live programme where we can go back, because as long as there's a good supporting case for delivery, there's access to funding on that basis. So I think the risk is very, very low with this, primarily because they've supported the project so far, and there is a door to access further funding.
I don't think anyone's arguing about the urgency of the situation. Obviously, businesses are really important, and it's so vital for that, and obviously residents as well in terms of mobility and accessing that area. So, but that doesn't mean that there shouldn't be scrutiny and everything that needs to be put in place. So, again, one more question before I ask if there's others. So, ownership and legal liability then. So, what liabilities transfer to the council if we take ownership from the Crown estate? Because it says the report, and forgive me for not probably understanding this properly, but the report says the Crown Estates holds the title by default. So what does that mean? And what is the council actually taking on? Because there's a lot more than just the bridge, isn't there, involved in this? So just clarity on that, please, if possible.
So just dealing with the Crown Estates and the way that they hold it under a piece of feudal law, which is ancient Latin French. They hold it under a law of escheat, which basically means that they didn't acquire it, but property has to have an owner, and it falls by default to the Crown. Now, because they didn't necessarily want it, the Crown doesn't have the full responsibilities of ownership forced upon it. So at the moment, they have no requirement to do any maintenance, any surveys, etc., etc. They just hold the title. If we take ownership, we're taking ownership, if you like, of the full liability. So we will be responsible for the safety and the safe demolition, and will be then responsible for putting a further bridge back in. I suppose esoterically, there is no real demand on the council to put a bridge back in. We could just intervene on a safety grounds and take away the old bridge and prevent the catastrophic circumstances of an unplanned collapse. I think the reality of it is, for the reasons you just stated, Chair, there's a need for a bridge. There's a need for a link over there. So, but the liability will be ours, which is why we've not, as a council over many years, been able to take a step into ownership, because you're basically taking on a blank cheque. But with the support we've got from EMCA for the project, with it sitting in the World Heritage Site, with that being part of the Mayor's priorities, and with the funding that they've put down so far for development of a project, I think there's confidence that, first of all, there's a need to remove what is a danger, a risk of flooding, a risk to other heritage assets like the weir. If this thing falls down, it will take large chunks of the weir with it. So to protect the existing assets and to remove the risk, but also the development of further project has got the funding of £2.5 million behind it as well. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, but just one sort of nuance to it then. So does the council then inherit the riverbank that surrounds the structure and any land adjacent to it? Because we're talking about the bridge structure, but obviously the footings and the banks and all the sort of the bridge in a wider sense. So is the council taking on those responsibilities as well? Just trying to understand what we'll be responsible for in the long term.
Okay, so the council already has some responsibility for the riverbanks under the principles of riparian rights, and some of the bridge footings and bridge abutments already sit within the public highway. What we won't acquire is responsibility for the road through the mills, for example, but we will need the dedication of some land on the mills side to allow the alignment of a new bridge to go in. On the village side, it's all ours anyway, and that's partly why we've had to intervene with the embankment, as we did in December, putting stone in, etc., with joint works with the Environment Agency. And the complicating factor behind this is extracting the bridge is complicated in its own right. Because it's never been ours, there's no as-built drawings exist for this bridge. The Crown Estates don't hold any as-built drawings. We don't know actually how it's going to perform when we try to demolish it. So it's quite a risky process that needs to be done very carefully. It's not a case of just knocking a bridge down. It's going to be quite a delicate operation. But then there's what we uncover in the riverbanks. Now, we know that a third of the abutment has disappeared. It's just been washed away. That's one of the reasons why it's so unstable at the moment. We know there's other subsidiary deterioration on the north side of the village abutment. And we've got to do some work on that. Now, that work determines how fast we can put Walter's Walkway back in. So, because the project here is to lift out Walters Walkway, demolish a bridge, do the embankment works, put Walters Walkway back in, so there's a connection for the businesses and community as soon as possible.
Okay, any questions? Councillor Wright.
Yeah, pardon me. I've got a couple. On the public consultation, it talks about a public event in February, but makes no mention of what the result of that consultation with residents and businesses. I think the chair's already alluded to some of the feedback that has been provided in alternative ways, so it'd be interesting to hear what that feedback was. But also, again, just going back to the chair's question, at 4.6, and this is all around the finance, it talks about funding already given to the council for this year and then for the next 2 years. But in the report, it talks around the business case for that. But you alluded in your response that it was also for, I think you called it permanent works as well over the next 2 years. So is the money that's already been approved that you referred to in paragraph 4.6, I take it doesn't include funding for the demolition. So the question is, what does it relate to? And then the second question is a much bigger issue, is the 25 million or whatever it is. And I understand there's a whole business case to go through to be actually before to get to that stage, but that's a significant amount of money. So are we looking to MCA for that as well?
Okay, in terms of just what the 2.5 million is for at the moment, the 2.5 million is for the development of further business cases, because it's a major project, so it needs to go through the National Standard Business Case profile. So it starts with outline business case and so on and so forth until you get to a final business case. It also supports design. There's quite a lot of survey work that needs to be done and quite a lot of river survey work, because one of the issues is that the main channels in the river have changed their flow, which is what they do. Rivers do that. So there's quite a lot of work to do along that way, and there's quite a lot of work in terms of bridge design as well. So the 2.5 million takes care of that. There might be some additional works done, particularly to riverbanks, but most of it will be design and sort of specialist survey type work. The 2 million for demolition is additional to that 2.5, and if you like, if you want to think about it this way, if we were thinking about a £15 million replacement project, this is bringing 2 million forward, because demolition was always part of the project, so we're bringing that forward. Excuse me, what was the other bits of the question?
About the consultation, what was said?
So the event in February wasn't consultation process. What the businesses wanted particularly was a business and community event, and bless them, they organised the bones of it, to basically talk about what was happening with the bridge, because from December the 21st or 22nd, we'd had to shut Walters Walkway because of the deterioration of the embankment. As far as people were seeing locally, nothing was happening. Things were happening, but I get it. There wasn't a lot of massive activity on site, apart from dropping 500 tons of stone in, and a lot of people stood there looking at the damage and trying to work out how bad it was. But we couldn't open Walters Walkway with any confidence. So myself, Paul Simpson, went along to meet the community with some of the businesses, and we basically met them 2 days after we had had the advice that the bridge was at risk and needed to come down. And as it says in the report, it's probably, the expert external engineering opinion is probably not going to tolerate another winter or flood season. So we went along and just basically imparted that information and basically said that, to our best of our knowledge at that time, we were looking at a process of keeping the Walters Walkway closed, because we've got no option, removing it, demolishing the bridge, putting Walters Walkway back. And at that time, and it's still the case, that we believe we can do that by February next year. We'd like to do it quicker if we can. The demolition has got to fit in to more predictable river conditions, and it's also more or less got to fit in completely with fish spawning season. So we're looking at really a window between June and October to get that bridge down. Feedback from that session, I think people were glad that there was a positive decision, disappointed about the amount of time it takes. Okay.
Councillor Rawson.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think pretty much everyone will agree that this needs to be done. It's an important location in terms of the World Heritage Site. It's important, obviously, for local people in Darley Abbey to be able to get around that part of the village, and obviously important for the businesses in Darley Abbey Mills, where there's a lot of public investment actually gone into restore that, and private investment as well, actually, over the last decade or so. So it would be a real shame to lose the benefit of all of that, and what's become really a really nice, thriving area for businesses in the local community. Of course, it creates the circular walk as well for the, so that people are able to get the maximum use out of Darley Park. So I think we'd agree this has got to be done. It's expensive, and it's welcome that EMCA are engaged, and the East Midlands Mayor is supportive of this to be able to help us come to a resolution. I think the time scale as well is it's important that we do move on it as quickly as possible. The businesses, obviously, it will have an impact on them, so we need to be able to do it as quickly as we can, but to do it safely. A couple of questions really, in terms of firstly, Crown Estates. I presume they won't resist in any way the acquisition, because from their point of view it's a liability, and I'm sure they'll be glad to just get it off their books, but just confirmation that there's been discussions with Crown Estates, and that will hopefully go fairly smoothly. And secondly, just to confirm the process, I think you've said it's remove the mill bridge, then replace the Walters Walkway as a temporary solution, but then that's not the permanent solution. We then come to a bigger, much bigger project to put a permanent replacement in. And is there any thinking at this stage in terms of that bigger project and what that might look like? Will it just be pedestrian, for example, or do we need vehicle access as well?
Right. I mean, first and foremost, I think you're absolutely right. Crown Estates will be overjoyed. This is a liability, and I think for the exchange of £1 and some paperwork, plus their legal fees, no doubt, they'll be more than happy. There is no one else coming to the rescue on this within this particular event from 2022 onwards, when the issues are first identified. The council has been in a position of provider of last resort. It's not owned by the Mills businesses, it's Crown Estates, as we've discussed, and it's not ours, but actually it's only going to happen if the council leads a project, and as you say, thankfully with EMCA's funding and the Mayor's support. In terms of the replacement project, the replacement project in the strategic outline business case goes through, I think, 5 options, some of which are not deliverable, some of which are amazingly expensive, and are probably beyond the scale where there is actually a good cost-benefit ratio. The one option that comes out very, very well is to have basically a nice pedestrian and cycle bridge, but it also has the capability of providing vehicle access in emergencies. So in flood as an escape route, because it will be slightly higher than the old bridge, so a little bit more resilient in flood conditions. It'll be open for longer, basically. In a Storm Babette type scenario, it'll be open longer than the old bridge would, because the old bridge would be underwater. So it provides an escape route, but also if there's emergency access required for fire or anything like that, then emergency services will be able to get through, but it won't be open to general traffic. Because that means a slightly different bridge with some very expensive management systems on it, etc. And as you can see, that what we're looking for here is a project that enhances the area, and we don't really want to create some of the issues that we've had in the past. I get that some of the businesses would love a free access road bridge. The community probably don't welcome that from the feedback we've had so far. And some of the hospitality businesses actually quite like it being quite quiet, but they'd like people to be able to walk there at the very least. So I think that's where we're beginning to settle, but the cost-benefit ratio on that is very strong. We're looking for 1 to 2, and it's over 1 to 3 on that basis.
I'll just add, Chair, that all those details are on the council website, so the strategic outline business case and supporting documents are all publicly available now.
Councillor Bonser.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, obviously we welcome this investment from EMCA for the sake of the businesses, and I think we need to crack on with it. This is exactly really what EMCA is there to do, to support these sorts of projects. So it's excellent that we're benefiting from that, and businesses in our city are benefiting from that, as well as the community who use that park, and myself included, do that nice circular walk, that access. It's really important that that's re-established. So whilst they say we should make hay when the sun shines, I think we need to demolish this bridge while the river's low and we're not affecting the fishes.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments, queries? No? Okay, so I don't think we can avoid the fact that it carries risks, and a project of this nature is inherent in it, all things considered. So I'd like to propose a fairly straightforward recommendation, and I think it would assist me and other councillors to maintain a watching brief on the project crucially without hindering or trying to hinder in any way the project, and it would be simply to ask the Cabinet to agree to the publication of a risk register to be maintained and updated throughout the project. Now, I'm sure that is buried somewhere within it, but I think it would be a great assistance to councillors' overview and scrutiny to see that, and obviously allow us to see what the various elements are and what the risks are. I always find them extremely useful, and this project seems to be a perfect way to actually apply that. So, are we agreed on that? That would be okay? Thank you. I'll email that over to you. Thank you. Any more? No? Okay, we'll move on. Thank you. Thank you. Right, item 10, which is Schools Capital Programme 2026-2027. Gamal.
Great, thank you, Chair. So, Chair, this is a report that normally goes to Cabinet around this time of the year to approve the next round of priority school building and condition capital projects for maintained schools. Just a little bit of background, Chair. The Council is allocated capital funding by the Department for Education for its maintained schools each year. The report sets out in Appendix 1 the indicative condition funding we're expecting. And due to the timing of this report, we haven't received the new allocation, but we anticipate it will be in the region of £2.5 million. Approval of the schemes is required now in order to plan and procure and deliver the majority of the projects over the summer period. And Chair, the priority areas are around roofing, window replacement projects and electrical rewiring projects. The full detail of the projects are in Appendix 2. These have all been prioritised carefully with the Council's Property Services team in line with condition data surveys and a rolling programme of survey and reports. The recommendations are outlined in the report. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you. Do we have any questions or queries? Councillor Kerr?
The way I read this report, Chair, it seems that we get about a tenth of the money we need to actually bring our school buildings up to where they ought to be. And that's a big funding gap. And it means that some of the critical work that we know is needed now, potentially, if this rate of payment continues, will not be done for another 10 years, by which time there may be even worse situations, so these will still never get to the top of the list. I wonder if there's any way in which we can highlight this to the government. Clearly, the government is aware that there are real pressures on education budgets because they've talked about the high needs block and doing something about this, but I'm sure we're not the only local authority which is really struggling on the building side. And I don't know whether the Cabinet would be minded to want to highlight that to the government. Within our own resources, I'd be interested to know what cheaper short-term work we are doing to prevent further deterioration of, for example, a roof structure because there's water getting in, and whether we are able to do some of those emergency works to just hold together what we've got for that bit longer. And secondly, later on the agenda, we're talking about some of the MCOM funding for energy improvements, for example, and some of the schemes here on re-roofing or some of the windows are improvements to the energy efficiency of our building stock. And I don't know whether we're allowed to match fund, for example, between the improvements for the roofing, which are the environmental improvements from some of the MCA funding, to be able to stretch this and make it go further.
Okay, ma'am.
Thank you, Chair. Very, very good questions. Just a little bit of context, Chair. In February this year, the Government Department for Education announced the National School Estate Strategy, a comprehensive document which sets out a blueprint for the next 10 years in terms of school investment, particularly around schools in need of significant investment, and that's been a helpful document. Chair, we're awaiting what that means in terms of financial allocations, but a lot of information in there, exactly as Councillor Kerr has outlined, in terms of maintenance of buildings and where you've got life expired stock, how do you replace them. Outlined in there is the National School Building Rebuilding Programme, where the Council has been successful in the previous 2 tranches, and we will be bidding again for projects where we think their life expired and where there needs to be whole school replacement. So, Chair, I just wanted to outline that document, comprehensive policy position, has already been released by the government in terms of that 10-year blueprint linked to Treasury settlements. But what it means for local authorities, we will need to wait and see the information, which I think is a response to a building stock that is starting to fail. So in terms of buildings at risk, that's been now outlined, where we may have concerns around roof structures and so forth. We have a process in place with the property services in terms of any particular assets that we feel are at risk type of structure, then buildings at risk monitoring processes are in place in order to record that and to respond to where we think failure might be possible in that. So assurance around that, so we don't have school closures happening. But of course, more and more investment is needed in the building stock, not just in local authority maintained schools, but also across multi-academy trusts and those types of nature. In terms of the AMCA link, I'm not sure on. I would suspect the Department for Education will kind of go back to the policy they've just announced in February around that 10-year blueprint, around that schools estate strategy and replacing and having long-term view on that linked to capital funded settlements over that sort of 5 to 10 year period. Thank you.
Councillor Kerr, did that satisfactorily answer your questions?
I'm slightly concerned that we're not being slightly more proactive in anticipating that in 2 years' time this roof will become a problem unless we do X. And I think if we can do X now, so that we haven't got a school closure in 2 years' time and we've got built ourselves in another 5 years from whatever, I think that sort of work, it's maybe happening, but I'm not reassured by what you've just said. And secondly, maybe there's somebody else within the authority, maybe even here, who would be able to explore whether or not the MCA funding might be able to be used in this area.
So, Chair, just to give you the reassurance, is probably the way I explained it, that there is a maintenance programme underway. Some of it is supported by this, some of it's routine maintenance, in order to be aware of building stock in that nature. Just assurance in relation to that. I'm happy to take away a question to colleagues to sort of see whether there is or isn't any opportunity for MCA to consider that. The only caveat, Chair, is again around that policy document, which is a very comprehensive policy document that's been issued by the government only this February.
Okay. Are there any other comments, questions or queries? No? Thank you, Gamal. We'll move on. Okay, so item 11 is Sustainability Investment Programmes for 2026-27.
Us again.
You again,
Yes, Chair. So just by way of explanation, in many previous years, we would have brought our annual Infrastructure Board Capital Programme, which follows naturally from the MTFP approval from the budget approval in February. And this report encompasses everything that would have been in that annual report, which you and we have seen many times: highways and transport, flood defence, etc. This is different because it covers both capital and revenue funding. And every time we've brought that report, certainly since I've been sitting in this seat, we've talked to you about how we've been evolving and improving the programme and our approach over the many years, including last year we talked about our approach to neighbourhoods and ward plans for transport. And this report really is a culmination of the improvement works we've done this year. And we now have this newly titled Sustainability Investment Programme. And that programme, just to confuse you, is made up of 3 separate programmes: a mobility programme, a network and assets programme, and finally a climate and active environments programme. And we're trying to be very transparent about our approach by bringing this report to you, because some of the funding has already been approved through the budget report in February, and 1.9 confirms that capital funding was already allocated and approved there, as was the Q3 slippage as part of that budget report. Things like our City, Our River funding, the Parks and Open Space programme, again, have already been approved, but we wanted to bring this to you so you could see holistically how those programmes sit together and the breadth really and complexity of what we're now facing. And I think that comes from those interdependencies and the scale of the programme and the investment, which really is focused on the arrival of the East Midlands County Combined Authority, and that now, as it is maturing, we're getting to see with greater definition and clarity what it wants to do as it's building this pipeline of projects for the region. Great news for us, I think, as a council and for our sister councils across the region, because it reduces our dependence on unsupported borrowing and reduces the associated revenue costs of that borrowing. So this report requests seeking acceptance of the MCA funding that has already been approved by the MCA board in March, which again includes both revenue and capital, and it's set out in Appendix 1, Tables 2, 3 and 4. And I just wanted to draw your attention to what their approach has been this year, and that's to allocate 2 large blocks of funding. The first around asset resilience, and that's set out in Table 2. And asset resilience covers what we would have presented to you in previous reports under the title of Highways Maintenance Block, which we would have got directly from the Department for Transport in the past. The allocation that MCA has made this year in March represents an over 3 million in additional funding from what we might have previously expected through the Department for Transport working on their formula. It also we're seeking acceptance of allocations that are yet to be approved by the MCA board, but that will happen, we hope, in June. Now, again, we were a bit late in the timings of this because of how the reports were issued, but the proposed allocations were discussed again at that 2nd of April Transport and Digital Committee, and that recommended an additional contribution of 1.1 million over the next 3 years for communities and neighbourhoods, which is the second big block of funding that MCA have decided that's how they're going to allocate to the 4 authorities. And that would be added to the 1.92 million that's already been approved, as set out in Table 2 of Appendix 1. And that funding will focus on the development and delivery of those emerging 18 ward plans that yourselves and officers have been working with over the last year, and we will be publishing those plans on the website over the course of this month. It also includes, of course, as we've just mentioned, the £2 million for the demolition of Darley Abbey Mills Bridge. I think I was also just worth noting with you all that now MCA is the Passenger Transport Authority. You previously would have seen projects related to passenger transport in this report. But again, that 2nd of April committee has set out a range of proposed investments which MCA will make, because they are now responsible, that will make benefits across the region. So I would ask you to go and have a look at that report if you are interested. I appreciate there are lots of pages in this, because we now have a number of boards and committees, so you've got a great big set of terms of reference. And the recommendations are perhaps more complicated because we're asking for agreement and approval for both revenue and capital funding. But the approvals are straightforward, and they're very much in line with those previous annual reports. 4.18 highlights the achievements that we've done from this year, from that capital programme, including 10 football pitches worth of carriageway resurfacing, more new school safe havens, and of course the completion of the outline business case for the new bridge at Darley Abbey. And I'll just also draw your attention to 4.10, which notes that last year the DFT created a new national road maintenance ratings, which sets out a red, amber, green for all the 154 highways authority in England for the very first time. Derby got a solid amber performance, but a green for wider best practice, which is unusual and certainly unusual in the region. Finally, the details of our new Sustainability Investment Programme are set out in the appendices, very much driven, as you would expect us, by the emerging mayoral transport plan, our own council plan, and of course it's underpinned by those strong asset management principles. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Wright, straight in there.
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions and then an observation. So I take it paragraph 2.11 is the reallocation of internal budgets that was referred to on the Darley Abbey Bridge discussion, and that's to come from the mobility programme, the net board programme. My question is, from a local council perspective, does that include any of the highways or transport initiatives that have been discussed with us as in our local neighbourhood boards, and where we've actually discussed what might happen next year? So I understand you've got to negotiate with MCA to make sure that you can reallocate the funding, but is there a discussion to have with local councils about their anticipated enhancements to the roads and highways and pavement and all the other issues? And my second question relates to the parks budget. I think it was 2 budgets ago now, we made a successful amendment to the medium-term financial plan, where the previous lack of any investment for parks was increased, and that was reinforced this year. What I struggle with, when we actually made that budget amendment originally, it was to enhance parks and play areas, and it was subsequently dependent on an audit of all of, not just the parks and play areas, but everything else to do with parks. You know, something like 400 plus projects was being mentioned to me. But we have no visibility on that as local council. So, you know, I asked right at the start, once that audit had been completed, which is probably now 18 months, 2 years old, and we still haven't got sight of it. So is there a reason why we can't have sight of it so that we know, where our parks, green spaces, etc., stand in the order of priorities? And could I, Chair, come back to my observation once?
Okay. Nigel?
I'll let Verna deal with the parks question, I think, because it's, for once, out of my remit. In terms of 2.11, that is basically just to identify a fund of 2 million in case we don't get the funding. But that can be merged around in different ways. We said there are some capital funds that we can utilise where we don't need to get into contract yet, but we've got secured funding for those projects. Simple terms, will it impact on the local plans? No, it won't impact on the local plans. Local plans have got a guarantee of 1.9 million this year, next year and the year after, and years 2 and 3 have got an index-linked inflation calculation added to them. And then there's the 1.1 that we're expecting to be approved or hoping to be approved in June, which will mean that there's £3 million for the delivery of those local ward projects. And again, that is years 2 and 3 are index linked in that sense. And obviously 2.11 also just seeks the addition of the bridge to the programme as well. Okay.
And on the parks budget, I think it's one of the community's scrutiny board, I'm going to get this right, asked for an update on the parks programme back in January. So I know Owen went and presented that to that community's group. So he went through that in detail. So again, when he's away on holiday, so I'll pick that up with him when he gets back and we can talk, we can meet you and go through the audit, no problem.
Okay, Councillor Wright?
Yeah, my final one is just an observation. I think it's section 4 of the report talks about how this sustainable investment, the strategic priorities behind it, and it talks around issues about the green city, green spaces, etc. And it's not the only strategy that talks about how valued our green spaces are within the city, not just parks, but green wedges, green belt, etc. And as I say, there's a lot of strategies made relate to that. But when it comes to our local plan, where again, there's a lot of inherent protections for green spaces, etc., we don't look across the whole council in terms of priorities. So we are now already eating into our green wedges and green belt. Recently, we've had approval, green wedges been approved as grey belt so that we can fit housing in. I'm not negating the need for housing, but it seems to us that housing development takes priority over all of our other strategies. And I think my question is for the recommendation for the Cabinet, is it time that we actually had a priority within the strategy? I recognise there's always going to be conflicts and that you've got to manage, but I think we've got to a stage now where housing development does take a #1 priority, whereas I'm sure that there's a lot of our residents would say actually maintaining the heritage, nature and green identity of our city ought to take a #1 priority. So I just raise it as an issue because yet again we're coming across another strategy that says underpinning this strategy is our green city, etc., but it's not consistent across all of the council's strategies.
All right, Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Chair. It's just around 4.11 really. So we mentioned in here that all wards have produced their neighbourhood plans specific to the local issues identified for traffic, parking, pedestrian safety and active travel. Now, I remember taking part in that one for my ward. We've drafted up quite an array of different things. I think we've put forward just over 24 different ideas in my ward. Some of them would cost a couple of £1,000s to fix. At least one of them would cost quite a few £1 million in order to do. When In terms of the first sort of year of this, because obviously we're looking at 3-year plans, when should councillors start to either, when can we expect to hear back, or when should we start asking questions about the first set of funding that we can expect and the first year's worth of projects? When can we expect announcements around those?
Okay, what the team have already started doing, and it's a shame they haven't got round to it yet, but they should, is basically going back on the ward plans and saying, what's the most important thing? What's the quick win? What's the low-hanging fruit? Because the idea of the plans is basically they've got more funding than we've ever had before, a lot more. I mean, just in context, when we used to get the integrated transport block, we used to have to pay for other things out of it, like traffic signals and stuff. And the 1.8 million used to get sliced down until we had between 400,000 and 600,000 specific for what were then ward priorities. Now we've got £3 million to deliver the ward plans, and that's guaranteed for the, well, we hope we'll have 3 million. But even if we just take the 1.9 million we've got, it is all for ward-related plan activity. If we get the 1.1, great, we'll have 3 million for guaranteed for the next 3 years per year. So they should be, the team should be coming in and saying, right, where do you want to focus the plan? And I suppose one of the tips is if you pick something that's got a TRO, then you're not going to see anything on the ground. You're going to see consultation. So some wards have sort of said, well, could we have that as an early win? Could we have this? And I mean, I can't comment on the local plan and the planning issues, but what a lot of the ward plans contain is links to green space, to really embed them a bit more in the community, or even to foster active travel through a green space. So a lot of the activities that we can probably start to engineer quite quickly are improvements to those park paths, for example. If they come to crossing points, making a rapid assessment against those crossing points, etc. You know, do they need drop curb? Do they need formal crossings, etc. But they should be coming to you, the team, and saying, what do you want? Because don't forget, as much as it's for you as councillors to show that you're active in your communities, MCA want to show that they are not just dealing with huge strategic projects. They want to show that MCA makes a difference in people's communities as well. So they should be coming to you. If they don't, in the next 3 to 4 weeks, let me know. But that's something that we, you know, as part of activating the programme, we're specifically going to resource that activity and how we actually activate those key projects for each ward.
Fab, thank you.
And Councillor Kerr.
Thanks for that, Nigel. Clearly, life continues, and it's now 6 months or so since we agreed our neighbourhood priorities, and other things have happened, and they will continue to happen over the next 3 years, and some of those may then become higher priorities or quick wins that aren't included in the plans so far. You know, as one local to Littleover is that people are now complaining about the speed that cars are going down Bakeacre Lane because it's been beautifully resurfaced. Speed was an occasional issue. Now it's become a regular issue because it's not full of potholes. So you solve one problem and create another one because it's full of, you know, it's got several pedestrian crossing points along the road. So how is there expected to be continuing public engagement and to fill in some of the gaps there, to be consulted or to be advised on things like a drop curb programme or future safe havens? What is that ongoing consultation going to be?
Okay, I think mainly hopefully through the neighbourhood boards and through councillors like yourself, basically, is how we propose to manage it. There's a tension here between being able to be reactive and having a plan. The best chance of having your plan is to stick to the plan, obviously, in terms of delivery, but it is obvious that things are going to change, developments happen, changes of usage, etc. So I think it's a case of officers and councillors trying to work together in terms of periodically reviewing the plan, but with the notion that if we review it, we're probably going to have to take something out to fit something new in as a responsive element. if there's too much of that happens, then the plan isn't a plan, is it? It's just going to be a constant reaction to the latest thing. So there's a tightrope to walk. We'll be activating these for the first time. I don't expect the 3-year plans to necessarily never change over that 3 years, but the bones of it, what's key to your area, should be pretty consistent. The ability to pick other things up around the edges, probably going to have to think about what's the priority in your plan and do you want to switch something for something. If it's, I'll repeat again, if it's absolutely minor works, then we have a budget for the whole city. You know, when it's gone, we'll have that every year and we'll do those minor works out of it. And there we're talking about, you know, basically maintenance that needs no design, no consultation. It's just, this is missing, can you put it back? That sort of stuff. If we're dealing with things that are genuine road safety concerns and they meet the criteria around road safety and the road safety foundation type criteria, then we have a statutory duty to do them, and that won't come out of neighbourhood funds. We'll find a way of dealing with that within the context of other EMCA awards. But you've got to be, I would say that you've got to be really careful about the value of having a plan is not undermined by the need to be reactive to everything. I think the core of the plan needs to be the core of the plan.
Councillor Kerr.
I think it's helpful, and I do agree that if you're going to have a plan, you ought to be keeping to the plan as far as you should be. But in terms of longer term, we've got a three-year period starting from now, and then another 3-year period, because in my way of thinking and in talking with our neighbourhood teams and our highways link people, we have different skills, and our projects often need some consultation up front, they need some design time, they need some delivery. And the different people will have different skills within that period. So to have a rolling programme rather than fixed 3-year terms would make a lot more sense to me in terms of best utilisation of staff. And you're nodding at me, and I don't know whether that means that you agree, but we can't do it, or yes, we agree and we are going to do it. So please say something more.
No, I agree, and I think probably that what we've not quite got to grips with yet is that there will be a follow-on to this. So a 3-year plan could turn into a 5-year plan, or it could be something different for the following 3 years. But I think as we get to the end of year 2, what we need to be doing is then looking at what the follow-on to the current plans are, because, of course, there'll be another round of EMCA funding. And this is part of what EMCA brings to us, is this ability to create a pipeline. Now, we've not had that before, whether it's at major scheme level or at local level. Yes, years ago, 15 years ago, we used to have future years funding, but they were tiny amounts, and all they did was take us past the initial feasibility, and then the scheme would stop. You're absolutely right. We need to build this concept of a rolling programme with probably a full 2-year review. So year 2 of this plan, we need to be looking at what we would now describe as years 4 and 5. And then year 3, we need to be looking at 5 and 6. So that's the way we need to be playing it, because that's how we access the funding. You know, we've got 3 years funding from EMCA because we've got 3-year plans.
Thank you. I did predict this would move into the sort of neighbourhood plan focus, because it's something which, I mean, well, put it this way, in terms of the transfer of transport to EMCA, I suppose more specifically the East Midlands is mayor, that's always concerned me in terms of this, because it represents a significant shift away from what we used to and how our local priorities were funded and delivered in the past. But we've all engaged in the new process positively, because that was the only option we had, and in some ways it was a very useful exercise, because it allowed us to actually engage with officers with everything up until that point, which goes back to Councillor Kerr's comment about, well, what if something falls outside of that plan or comes along in the meantime, which always happens. I do have concerns that there isn't a clear published mechanism that we've seen yet in terms of ward councillors on how the funding's going to be allocated fairly across the wards or the region or the city, whatever you want mechanism you want to use. There doesn't seem to be any minimum allocation as well that ward councillors should expect. And there doesn't seem to be any explanation about how competing ward priorities may be balanced in some way, because one ward may have very specific issues in their local plan that may not necessarily align to MCA or the East Midlands Mayor priorities. You've mentioned a few things about connecting green spaces. Well, that might be relevant in one ward, it won't be relevant in others so much, so that's a big concern. So I think there is a risk of uneven delivery across the city in this, and we need to really be aware of that. And even some wards having multiple schemes progressed whilst others don't. So it goes back to that, we need a check and balance really to actually understand, so we all get a fair amount of funding. So I think from our perspective that we do really need assurances that this new approach won't create that inequality in general terms, or most importantly in my view, further erodes the councillors' ability to actually deliver for their residents. I find it incredibly frustrating that the list of small interventions that have been increasing over the last few years just haven't been able to be delivered. You know that. I've moaned at you many times about this and tried many times to try and get that through, but it's just not working in terms of the MCA process. It's just impossible at the moment. So I've tried to capture just two very simple recommendations really, which hopefully everyone can agree on, and they are really that Cabinet should ensure that there's a transparent fairness framework published for the allocation of neighbourhood funding. I know that's very sort of open to interpretation, but just something that we can actually see where you know the allocation is being spent. And I think residents would greatly appreciate that as well from the council tax that they pay, to see what's being put back into their neighbourhoods. And I think also an effort should be made to provide a clear route for councillors to ensure inclusion of issues that arise that may not be have been captured in their local neighbourhood plan. So it's kind of keying in with what Councillor Kerr has said. It's all well and good that we've submitted our plans for consideration, but we always get day to day, week on week, we're getting issues that arise that maybe weren't an issue a few months ago several months ago when we finalised the plans. So they would be the two recommendations. I think they're fairly straightforward. Councillor Kerr?
I'm happy with those, and I particularly to deal with the little issues which are too big to fit into a minuscule pot, I think is quite important. Can I just ask something else before we approve them, which is, I think it's probably a Werner question, which comes back to the climate change issue, and I was talking about the education buildings and whether there's any scope to be able to use that within that area or not.
So do you mean the MCA funding you were referring to? So the funding we're talking about here is transport funding. So that it's not it's allocated for transport through MCA. So it's not for energy funding. I think MCA is how they're working on their climate, and the climate change team is still emerging. I haven't seen a specific budget that's set out for energy at this time for MCA.
Okay, Chair, I was in paragraph 4.14.1, which says the Council is committed to producing its own carbon impact and working with partners, etc. And I interpreted this to mean that this is funding that was not just dedicated to climate related to transport, but more widely. But this is just for transport. So could the revenue funding for that include things like reintroducing the cycling safety schemes that we had operating at every school at one point?
Sorry, I realise what you've asked me now, because you were talking about MCA funding with Gamal. So the 4.14.1 is the Climate Action Fund, which has already been approved by through the MTFP process. That is our funding. So yes, that is a conversation that we could pick up with Gamal and can be used to support council schemes. So I'll have a chat with him. Yeah.
Can we do cycling?
On the funding for cycling, Active Travel England fund directly to MCA now, with the idea that some of that revenue comes to pay for what was bikeability previously. So we've managed to maintain our bikeability programme, but then bikeability will now be part of ATE funding that goes passporting through MCA, just to sort of make it hopefully less confusing. From next year, Active Travel England funding will just be included as part of the main TCR grant for actually what it is, rather than being accounted for as a separate funding stream, which I think will be helpful.
Okay. So can we just return to the two recommendations I've put forward then? There were to ensure transparency and fairness framework so that we can actually have a view on the allocation of neighbourhood funding, and then obviously a recommendation to provide a clear route for councillors to ensure inclusion of issues that don't fall within the plan. Are we okay with agreeing that? Thank you. I really hope that my concerns over this are allayed as we move forward. If this works, I will fully support it. If it can deliver the things that we need to do in my ward, and I'm sure in all of your wards via this mechanism, although it is taking a lot longer than I'd like, then I won't have any complaints. But I remain to be convinced, so prove me wrong. Okay, thank you very much. Moving on then, we have item 12, which is corporate complaints policy. Surely we don't get many complaints.
There you go, sorry, it wasn't working. We get a few, Chair. I'm Annabelle Borwick, I'm the Customer Contact Manager, bringing this report tonight. And this report seeks approval for the City Council's new corporate complaints policy, which replaces the current customer feedback policy adopted in 2021. Local authorities are currently under increasing scrutiny from the local government and social care ombudsman regarding how complaints are handled. The Ombudsman has introduced a complaint handling code which sets out clear expectations around transparency, accessibility, fairness and organisational learning. The proposed policy ensures Derby City Council aligns these with the national expectations and reduces the risk of adverse Ombudsman findings. The policy introduces a clear two-stage complaints process, improved accessibility so complaints can be made however they are expressed, stronger governance arrangements to ensure the council learns from complaints and improves services. To support this, the report also proposes strengthening the corporate complaints function, including a complaints management system and to improve oversight and reporting, and appointing a member responsible for complaints as required by the code. Overall, these changes will provide residents with a clear and fair route to raise concerns, whilst ensuring council managers complaints consistently, transparently, and in line with national best practice. The report therefore asks Cabinet to approve the new corporate complaints policy and governance arrangements that support that. And I do apologise because I've noted that the numbering system in the policy needs amending and realigning, so we'll sort that. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Kerr.
Thank you. The Derby Homes went through this process not very long ago and have identified that some of the complaints that come in are listed as complaints, although they're actually calls for service. How are we sure that we are not going to fall into that same track by what's done here at the moment? Is that because you talked to Derby Homes? And the second question is 2.1, which is the recommendation that says is asking Cabinet to confirm that the revised corporate complaints policy meets the requirements. Now, I just feel that it's not actually up to Cabinet to do that detailed scrutiny and knowledge that it will meet the complaints, meet the requirements. I feel that they ought to be doing something slightly more wishy-washy, but to confirm the new policy as one that meets the requirements, rather than to think that Cabinet have the legal nous to be able to say it does. They need to be approving it as something that does, rather than formally approving it.
I can't get the handle of these buttons, sorry. Yes, Derby Homes do have a very similar policy. In fact, I wrote that whilst I was working at Derby Homes, so that's fine. The complaint handling code for the local social care ombudsman is very, very similar to the housing ombudsman. So yes, whatever happens, the council, in relation to your request for service, the council need to be given the right to remedy that as a service request before following down a complaint process. And an example of that would be if, say, we get a number of complaints, not lots, regarding mist bins, which is a very passionate subject, but it's about enabling the council to be aware of that and go back and collect that bin. So yes, they will always be classed as a service request first. And your second part under 2.1, that's absolutely fine. The policy that's written complies with the complaint handling code, which is the same, very similar for housing ombudsman and social care ombudsman. And with the appointment of a member responsible for complaints, there will be increased scrutiny throughout that process.
Councillor Wright.
Yeah, my question's on a different 2.1 in the strategy, in the strategic policy itself. It talks about a exclusion where an issue's 12 months or more old. I can understand the need to have a cut-off point, but how does that align with, for example, complaints around SENS, where if it goes to tribunal, it could be well in excess of 12 months. Does it align with policy in relation to SENS complaints, for example?
You can't really run the two systems at the same time. So if there's a tribunal being undertaken, you would put a hold on a complaint and potentially pick it up after a tribunal, because you can't do both at the same time. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. Is that recognised in the policy?
Yeah, absolutely. So anything going through a legal process can't enter the complaints process, so it would have to wait till that's expired.
Okay. Any more comments, questions? No? Thank you very much. We'll move on. Okay, item 12. Sorry, I've just done item 12. Item 13, which is redevelopment of key council-owned city centre sites. Catherine.
Thank you, Chair. Catherine Williams, Head of Regeneration and Economic Growth. I appreciate the report's extensive, and I'm sure there'll be a number of questions from committee members. I would just like to give a brief overview of the report, if I may. So this is centred on the contractual arrangements with our development partner, Vinci Ion, and these arrangements are needed to bring forward a number of key sites in the city centre, including the first major scheme under this partnership, which is marketplace regeneration. To reach this stage of the procurement process, Vinci Ion have heavily invested in preparing a proof of concept for the assembly rooms or market regeneration site, and this site is the first to be included because of how important it is in the city centre regeneration. The proof of concept includes a level of master planning and design, and also a robust market tested business plan. And in addition to the proof of concept, the procurement process also required agreement of the form and terms of the contracts that we are proposing to enter between the council and Vinci Ion. So now the requirements of the procurement are satisfied, and just to note, this has included due diligence on the proposals that I'll come on to. Officers are recommending to Cabinet that we approve the appointment of Vinci Ion as our strategic development partner. We approve the proof of concept for the marketplace regeneration scheme and other recommendations implementing various associated delegated authorities to move the whole process forward. So just a brief summary of the body of the report with a few key points highlighted. Firstly, in terms of the proof of concept and the wider context for this report, obviously city centre regeneration is a key priority for the council, and it's why this appointment is required, and the report sets out the process of what we've done to date on this appointment and procurement. The report also sets out the master plan for the marketplace regeneration site, which has 3 elements to it: Derby Maid, Derby Works and Derby Hotel, plus the regeneration of the marketplace itself. The report summarises the business case for each of the phases, and this includes current market conditions, due diligence that's been carried out to check and challenge the plans, and the terms of the contract that have been agreed in principle between the parties. So a few key points to note on this section of the report. Firstly, the options considered for Derby Maid as the proposed first phase of development, they included a number of options on a scale of commercial and public mix, and the option selected is considered to be the best one to achieve the council's city centre objectives, fit in with what already exists in the city centre, respond to the findings of the public consultation, and achieve financial sustainability. Extensive market testing that's been evidenced to us does show appetite from hotel operators and private investors to deliver Derby Hotel. And there is clear market failure to deliver Grade A office space, for which we also know there is demand. And it's suggested this is the 3rd phase to benefit from the uplift that will come from phases 1 and 2. In terms of due diligence, our commercial property advisors, Avison Young, have confirmed that the assumptions and workings in the business case are reasonable, and officers have also had our own extensive discussions with Vinci Ion, and there's been an economic impact assessment produced, which gives a value for money assessment classed as medium, with a benefit cost ratio of 1.9. So, secondly, to summarise the contractual and delivery arrangements, the report describes the structure of the partnership, and because this partnership is intended to cover a number of sites in the city centre, there'll be an umbrella agreement that means we work exclusively with Vinci Ion for a period of time on these sites. And then for the assembly rooms and the car park site, there's a master development agreement as well, and this places time-based obligations on our partner to progress the scheme. And then within this, there are individual phase agreements for each of the elements described in paragraph 4.36. And the reason these different phases need different agreements is because the land ownership and transfer arrangement varies across the different phases. So the delivery strategy is summarised in the flowchart that's appended to the report that I'm sure we can discuss in more detail after my summary, and explains how the different phases are proposed to be brought forward. The other key point that I would highlight is the only financial commitment that the council is being asked to commit to at this stage is £225,000 to fund council side costs of taking all of this forwards. And the financial implications covers the options for how this can be funded. These costs include officer time, legal costs, and any advice or further due diligence we might want to commission. And all of the costs associated with progressing the development will be met by our partner. Just a final point to clarify is there are private papers as well for this report, and that's because some additional supporting information includes commercially sensitive information. So if there are any detailed questions on any of detailed costs, market assessment or timescales, I suggest we cover those in the private session of this committee. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, just to note, we do have a private session after this, and it may be that officers want to advise us that certain questions, certain answers may be more appropriate in that section. Obviously, I have very much of the mind that we need to be very open and transparent as much as we possibly can. We are taking your advice on anything that may otherwise stray into that area. So can we just please make sure that we only defer to the private session if absolutely necessary? Yeah. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay, open this up. Councillor Wright first, then Councillor Kerr.
Yeah, I've got a lot of questions, as you'd expect, about this, but Chair made a recommendation I can't remember where I actually saw it. It was really about more detailed scrutiny of this, because it does, it's such an important investment for the city. Not only do we need to get it right, but we need to make sure we've got the taxpayers' pound at the front of our mind. So you made a recommendation that it, over time we have scrutiny from the Regeneration Board and regular scrutiny, and to come back here. And I think that process will allow us to actually make sure that we keep track of this project going forward. So I think that's something that I would certainly support if you made that recommendation. Just in relation to specifics, it's the Derby Maid element that gives me the greatest cause for concern. I'm assuming that the hotel and the office accommodation, there'll be a lot of market information available, that will actually justify that business case or not. It strikes me with the business case for Maid has evolved over time, reacting to public consultation and what's viable, for example. And I just get the impression it's ended up in a place where it's basically what we can achieve rather than what we need. And also the financial case seems to be very, very shaky. Even the report talks about at 4.20, it talks about private investments not feasible for this. It needs to be funded by the public sector to cover initial capital, but also the early years revenue growth and incentives. And to me, that sounds like an open-ended cheque with no real justification about how, when is it going to break even? If it was a commercial venture, you'd expect to be able to have sufficient cash reserves for operating expenses for the next 12 months. This really seems to be, extended into the distant future. It sort of relies on justification, some that look like good practice in Chester, Stockport, etc. And there's some metrics involved in that, but not crucial ones. Just do these, exemplars you're using to base the business case on. Does it actually provide evidence that it actually makes money? What does it cost? What are the liabilities that are building up for the council? And we've had some recent experience. The market hall's not gone the way that we anticipated it would be in the business case. So that one gives us the most concern. But there are some other exemplars in the UK and abroad. So, for example, in Margate, they've got the Turner Contemporary Museum, which actually bases the drawing people to the city through art. Now, we've got, and there are some links to Margate in terms, but if you've been there, it does draw people from all over the country and abroad. We've got Joseph Wright in here, and popularity has been demonstrated through the exhibition at the National Gallery. Have we thought about, there's Malaga's another example, abroad where, the whole city's been regenerated by the association with Picasso, and it's a much weaker association than the Derby's got with Joseph Wright. Another example would be moving from the museum to this in the city centre and having some of the replacing some of the capabilities that are in the current Maid one. So I just feel that of all of the elements, this is the one that fills me with a lot of concern that it's not going to deliver what we anticipate, because the hotel and the office are nice, but this is the real element of the development that's intended to draw visitors to Derby. So I'd like, and obviously not just today, but as we move forward, a lot more reassurance that this is going to deliver what's expected to deliver.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll give a few thoughts in response. Maybe Tammy wants to add to these. But in terms of the Derby Made proposal and the mix of uses that are proposed as part of that, yes, we have referred to other exemplars from other parts of the country, but I guess the key point there is every exemplar has elements that we want to replicate and learn from, but there is no lift or shift because nowhere else is Derby. So we've been really keen, and our developers have been really keen, that through the public consultation, we've listened to what residents would use and what they would want, but also visitors as well, because we want to attract people in from a wider catchment area and build on our tourism offer as well. So I suppose that's the first point I'd make, is there is no lift and shift model, but absolutely take your point that we need to learn what has worked in other areas and what hasn't. The second point I'd make about Derby Made is when I referred to the options that have been looked at and I talked about a scale, there is a fully commercial option where we simply bring in an offer to the city that will make money and take care of itself, but that won't necessarily deliver the mix of uses that the city centre needs or that people want. So what we're proposing with Derby Made is a mix of commercial uses in the shape of ground floor, leisure, F&B, food and drink type units that are let on a commercial basis and generate income, and a rooftop bar. And the income generated from those uses supports the community and public uses that are proposed on the first floor of the building. Now, there is a particular mix that we're suggesting, including a form of library, including a music venue, including workspace and general public meeting space, all of which we believe, based on what we've been provided with, respond to market assessments and respond to the public consultation. There is flexibility in there, and we'll continue to evolve this. This is not absolutely fixed and set in stone. I think we've been quite open about that in the report. So yes, we can bring further detail of this back to Regeneration and Housing Committee, because we've been there a number of times before and recognise that's been asked for. So I think in terms of your specific points around museum and art, obviously we've considered a range of options, and what we've been really conscious of is building on what already exists in the city and not duplicating. So if we have included potential exhibition and gallery space as part of that flexibility within the building. But obviously we know we've already got Derby Museums Trust and the facilities that exist, so we would want to absolutely make sure we support that and build on that. So I think those were my initial thoughts in response. I don't know whether, Tammy, you've got anything else to add.
I suppose just a couple of things to add to that. I mean, I think, as Catherine explained, we've worked really hard on the mix of uses for Derby Made, and I think if you are to curate a space, as we're trying to do with Derby Made, if you're not going for a fully commercial option, then it's not going to be fully commercially funded by the private sector. And that's a point really to reflect in terms of the exhibition space. If we were to put an art gallery in there, that's not going to generate income to run the business. So it was important that with Derby Made that we got that blend and that balance of commercial uses and public sector uses, so it didn't become an ongoing subsidy requirement for the council. So if you look at some of the other big art galleries, for example, yes, they draw footfall, but they do require an ongoing revenue subsidy. So it's important that we think about that in the mix and the blend for the business plan. In terms of tenant incentives and capital costs and things like that, I think it's important to reflect that in a commercial model there will always be tenant incentives, whether that's a private or a public sector development, and it's standard practice to offer tenant incentives and fit out costs as part of a normal development. So we've built those into the business case to make sure that they are covered, both for Derby Made, Derby Hotel and Derby Works, actually, because there will always be tenant incentives involved in the private and the public sector elements. I think, as I would also reiterate, as Catherine said, we have listened to the public in developing the Derby Made proposal, and we will continue to do that, because it's really important, I think, that Derby residents own what goes on the marketplace, and they are part of it, and they feel like they've had part of developing their solution. We have to come up with a concept, obviously, but it's really important, I think, that people help to shape what the look and feel of that building is as it evolves and it moves forward. So there is, I think the important thing for us to recognise here is that we need to make progress, and we need to make to start to put a spade in the ground, essentially. But this is the start of the process, not the end of the process. And we need to make sure we absolutely get it right for the people of Derby.
Thank you. Councillor Kerr.
I'm also a bit cautious about this, and so I've got a series of questions, which probably if I just give them to you with maybe a bit of background, that might be the way to do it. Firstly, the order of delivery. I don't know why we're starting with Derby Made when the others are more commercially viable. Why aren't we starting with something that is commercially viable and then being able to put something back in again? And it would also presumably increase footfall. I'm not sure whether we need a 4-star hotel, because we have Leonardo, which considers themselves to be 4-star, and we have the Cathedral Quarter, which considers itself to be 4-star. I don't know what levels of occupancy are there, but we've been told in the past that it's the weekend, there is space. So I'm not, and the report says there's a funding gap for hotels. So that is not that commercial either. The office space, we were going to have office space where Cathedral 1 was going to be going. And that was deemed to be not viable, and that is now supposed to be flats. So I don't know how viable Grade A office space is either. And it just worries me that we are launching into something that the commercial sector have balked at. And unless we really know that this is going to deliver additional footfall and not just divert footfall, for example, coming to see an exhibition there rather than going to the museum and art gallery, then this is not going to be a winner. So how do we know it's not going to be diverting footfall? I think it's really important that what we build is going to be flexible for the future. What we have at the moment is a building of its time which has turned out to be very inflexible and not easy to reutilise, as well as its potentially building issues, structural issues. So how can we be sure that what we're building now is going to be able to be refurbished and repurposed and not demolished and rebuilt before we've actually finished paying for it? And at the rate of repayment for Derby Works, we're talking about, I can't remember how many years, it was not just decades, it was, I think, 200, 300 years or something or other to be able to get a payback on what we're going to be getting from it. So it is an investment for Derby, and we have to look at the payback not in terms of pounds and pence, but in terms of value in other ways. And I'm not quite sure how that value in other ways is being factored into this, because it's right for public sector to be investing in things that aren't just giving you a bottom line financially, but I can't see how we're doing that. And coming back to the sort of things that Councillor Wright was saying about the market hall, so, and the competition that the market hall, with its food and beverage and space for performance and small commercial enterprises, seems very similar to Derby Made. Why are we not just making it even more difficult for the market hall to thrive if we're going to be doing Derby Made? I can't see a coherent business plan for both of them working together.
Right. So I think I've captured most of those, Councillor Kerr, so between us we'll work our way through. So your first question, I think, was why Derby Made first. Obviously, the whole master planning has been, yes, about business case, but also design. There has to be a master plan that creates a design on the site that works, and there's a few reasons why it's proposed Derby Made is first. The first reason is because it is the site that fronts the marketplace, and the reason for that is that it's the site that generates the most significant footfall in accordance with the business plan and provides a range of activity that will attract people to that part of the city centre. Hotel and office will as well, but in a different kind of way. So that's why Derby Made, part of the reason why Derby Made is the first phase. The other reason is that the other phases require further work in terms of, as you've alluded to, in terms of investment and viability. So that's another reason. In terms of why another 4-star hotel, I think if you want a detailed conversation around some of the market assessment that's been undertaken, we could cover that in private session, and there is a reason for that that I'll explain and give assurance to the committee on in private session. The office question, yes, there've been a couple of proposals for Grade A office schemes in the city centre, the most recent one being Cathedral 1. I think we were on the verge of bringing that forward, and I think it was at the point where COVID hit and lockdown hit, which meant we didn't proceed with that scheme. But in terms of viability, that is a well-acknowledged, well-experienced situation for a number of cities across the UK. Probably only a handful of cities could deliver Grade A office development without any kind of public sector intervention. Most UK towns and cities, Grade A office requires public sector intervention, and that's because of the difference between the cost that it takes to deliver the offices and the value based on the rents, and particularly for Derby, when we don't have significant Grade A, any new Grade A office accommodation in the city centre, that is a cycle that we need to unblock, and that's why there's a viability challenge with the office scheme. I would say that we do strongly believe there's a really strong strategic case for that, though, because of all of the elements of our city centre regeneration strategy, live, work and play. We've got a number of housing schemes that have been developed and are being developed. We've got a number of play, leisure activities, Valent Life, Market Hall. We haven't cracked the work bit. We're seeing that changing with some new developments, but not the significant scale that Derby Works will bring. Viability challenge, I think, was your next one. I suppose, I mean, we did include in the options appraisal for this report, the council could sell the site. We could sell the site for a purely commercial scheme that would not require any city council intervention at all. It's likely, though, because of how significant that site is, where it is, the heritage considerations, the conservation area location, the importance to the city centre as a whole, with it being in the location it is, we would have to have so many safeguards and conditions around the sale of that site. We believe it would be unlikely those would be palatable for a commercial operator to take on, potentially. And also there are significant planning obviously requirements as well for the site as well. So that's viability. In terms of adding value and not diverting, I think a colleague of mine, I think it's Robbie, often uses the phrase, we don't need to focus just on dividing up the pie, we need to increase the size of the pie. We believe that there is a catchment of potential visitors and users of the city centre that we aren't currently attracting as many of those as we could do, and therefore we need more of an offer to attract more people. So yes, we do need to be careful that we don't duplicate and take away from what already exists, but we also need to create more of an offer that attracts more people into Derby. And then flexibility, absolutely flexibility is key, and I think with the Assembly Rooms building, it was a very bespoke design for a specific purpose, with a very intricate design internally that could not be repurposed for anything else. The Derby Made in particular is a very flexible design with flexible spaces that could be repurposed and changed in the future if they needed to be. So that's been a really important principle that we've made sure is part of the design process. I think, forgive me if I've missed any, but I think that's most covered.
Councillor Kerr.
No direct addressing of the tension with the Market Hall. But can I also just sort of ask about the costs, given where we are and inflation and the energy scenarios, are the costs listed here when were they prepared? If it was more than a month ago, they'll be out of date.
It was more than a month ago because we've had to receive them, consider them, due diligence and prepare them for Cabinet. Obviously, events in the world have changed since that time. There are standard contingency and inflation allowances, as you would expect, in those cost plans. And obviously, we will keep a watching brief. There is a journey, as Tammy alluded to earlier, to further develop these and develop the costs as we move forward. And, you know, any of us have a crystal ball. So by the time these proposals hopefully come to fruition, we can't say where we will be, but there are allowances built into the cost plan.
I think, Councillor Kerr, on that issue of, and I certainly don't speak for the Cabinet, obviously they'll have their own views on it, but I would see in the longer term where the whole mix, the quad as well, can all work together, and what's on offer may change slightly, may complement, and I think as things bed in with the whole new picture of the city centre site, then I think naturally things will change and fall into place. I do accept your concern, but I think we just can't. We just have to wait for things to progress, and I think there's going to be an element of things just falling into place and finding their feet really and their place in this whole new city centre site. In terms of recommendations, I was going to put one forward, and with more consideration, I just don't think actually the Cabinet would either accept it or whether it's. But I will ask it anyway. It's probably more of a question. So I was thinking along the lines of requesting a deferral of final approval. So that until the Regeneration and Vibrancy Change and Climate Change Scrutiny Board could have a very close look at this, and maybe yourselves as well as Exec Scrutiny have sort of a full in-depth review, and then, you know, if there was new additional meetings needed, we could hold them. But with hindsight, it's extremely unlikely that Cabinet would agree to that. So what I'll probably morph that into is a genuine sort of positive way of trying to get the wider councillor cohort to be a critical friend, positively engage in the process via the Regen and Vibrancy Board. But we would expect them to have access to the business case, the updated business case, cost plans and risk registers. And I think that shouldn't be something which Cabinet should be afraid of. I think genuinely, I've said this many times, I'm on that board, to say, bring it to us, we can help, because this is the most important site in the city. And none of us should be doing anything to actually hold up progress, but it has to be right. And that doesn't mean we should skip scrutiny. So kind of like morphed into what we could see as quite an aggressive recommendation that may not be accepted very well, to flipping it really to a very positive offer.
I think there's a win-win.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think I'd really welcome that. I think it's important to understand what Cabinet's been asked to consider at the next meeting, and it is to conclude the procurement phase, so to appoint Vinci and Ion as the strategic development partner to progress the detailed work, really. And that's the important thing that you know, as Exec Scrutiny need to consider. We will be bringing much more detailed plans back through scrutiny and to Cabinet for consideration as we work up the next stages. But when you look at the development flow chart, this is a really complex development that happens in many city centres, and it's important that we get it right. We could have left this, as Catherine alluded to the private sector, but we would have got a very different answer on that side, probably not something that we would, you know, as a city council would have wanted to curate in that space. So by necessity, this is taking this scheme forward, but absolutely we would really recommend bringing this back to Regen Scrutiny and to Executive Scrutiny at the appropriate times.
I mean, we as a board will see a lot more naturally, because everything that has to go through Cabinet comes through us. So but it really is, the marker really for me needs to be via that board, because you know, that is the process to have a far smoother process and enable councillors to positively engage. I remember back in the day, I mean, it never happened, but remember we were proposing a swimming pool on the Riverside, and the relevant board at the time, I remember being on it, and we were engaged with very early on in the process, plans, you know, and it was very much not set in stone, but we all had real positive input into that, and it didn't turn into a bun fight. It wasn't, you know, people trying to stop it. It was sensible proposals about what could work, what might not work, you know. And for me, there are issues in this, and we need to make sure that we get this right. But in general terms, that engagement, I think, genuinely can be a very positive process.
And thank you, Chair. And just to add to Tammy's point, absolutely, because there's two stages to this. Assuming Cabinet accept the recommendations in the report tomorrow and proceed, this decision and the associated documentation will be on record then and can be picked up at any point with Regeneration and Housing Scrutiny Committee to look at in more detail. So that's one set of discussion. And then, as and when we are ready to bring back a specific decision to Cabinet on the Derby Maid phase and enter into the contractual arrangements to deliver that phase, that will be subject to further scrutiny through the executive scrutiny process to give a second opportunity to look at the more detailed proposals. So hopefully that helps in terms of understanding the decision we're taking now and what can be done between now and when further information comes back for detailed approval.
Okay, Councillor Kerr.
I'm just thinking that the conservation area and whatever it's called, heritage group, would probably also be a good group to be taking proposals to at an early stage when there's still time for flexibility, because it is a conservation area and it would be a but at this stage or ongoing?
Well, I mean, I would, in consultation with, we've got to remember that we have overview and scrutiny with elected councillors representing the city. You know, I full respect to those other boards, committees. I'm sure they will be consulted, but the focus in my mind needs to be on in the robust overview and scrutiny via councillors. But I'm not saying that they shouldn't be consulted, but I'm sure they will be. But the most important thing for me is the mechanisms we have within the overview and scrutiny councillors, basically.
So they will and have been consulted as part of the planning process. So they have had early sight of the proposal. So
just two other things then. And I don't know what the appetite is for these being recommendations. I think we can all agree, hopefully, that the scrutiny side of things is a no-brainer, really. Going back to what Councillor Wright said about Derby Maid, now I've made some comments in the press and everything and before on this, that there needs to be honesty about if a cultural offer that is a mixture between commercial and not so commercial, should we say, have the honest conversation about what that means, because you know, I think that if there is going to be an ongoing subsidy required, then we should be honest about that and have that conversation, and the expectation should be that, well, actually, you know, it may be that we have to provide this amount of money per year to support it, and then it's the Cabinet's job really to sell that as to what that means in terms of benefits, economic benefits and all the other things that it brings. So, you know, and have that conversation. So I was thinking along the lines of asking Cabinet to agree an independent cost benchmarking and sensitivity testing on both the overall amount of money that this is being proposed to cost, which is circa 100 million. It sounds a credible amount of money, but actually may not be in today's terms, given all the construction costs and increased. So I think that really does need testing to ensure that we've got that right. and also an assessment made of Derby made in regards to potential ongoing annual subsidies. Only potential, because I've spoken to the leader many times and she's assured me that she believes that it will wash its own face. I have a different view, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm completely opposed to it. It's just a conversation. So I don't know whether members would be... Councillor Rawson?
Yeah, I mean, my interpretation of it is it's going to be a mixture of commercial and council-led uses within that building. So it really depends on the mixture. So you can have more or less commercial input into the building. And depending on that, there'll be a point where it's break even and it will wash its own face. Or if you, or the future cabinet, whenever that decision is made, there'll be a point where it will require a subsidy if we decide to include more, perhaps more cultural offer and less commercial. So. To my mind, it'll be a decision at that point as to what exactly is the mix going to be in the building between commercial and council-led offering, and that will determine really whether or not it will require a subsidy or not. If I phrase that as a question, as to am I right in that sort of thinking?
So. Just to roll back right to the very beginning, when we initially embarked on this procurement exercise, one of the things we said is we want proposals to come forward. We recognise there's viability challenges. We know that. We've seen that for a number of years, but we want to see proposals come forward that don't require an ongoing financial subsidy from the council. So that's what we asked for, and that is what Vinci Iron have provided for us in the current Derby Made proposals. So if you think of it as a balancing act, to your point, Councillor Rawson, yes, they've achieved what they believe to be, and this is forecasts, I acknowledge that, all business plans are forecasts. This is a forecast operating model that has a certain amount of income generated from leases to commercial operating operators, food and drink, leisure, and a certain amount of activity that requires a subsidy, and one offsets the other. And they've provided an operational business plan that's in the private papers that shows how that all works. And we've had the capital costs and the Derby Made business plan reviewed by our commercial property advisors, Avison Young. And whilst there are commercial property advisors, they are independent third-party experts in the property field. So they have reviewed all the costs and they've confirmed that in terms of benchmarking, they are reasonable. So they've given us comfort through that due diligence that the costs are reasonable. And yes, we've more work to do to develop these proposals further. And yes, when we come back to Cabinet in due course, at that point, the business plan may look the same, it may look slightly different. And at that point, we would be asking Cabinet to make a decision with transparency about what we believe the position to be at that point on the operating position of Derby Made. But as it stands today, we've had a particular criteria that we wanted proposals to come forward that wouldn't require an ongoing subsidy, may require some capital investment, may require some borrowing or some grants or other capital injections to fill the viability gap, but we didn't want anything that would require an ongoing subsidy, and that's what we believe we've got in the current mix, but it will be a decision that's taken at the next Cabinet decision.
Thank you. And with that in mind then, I think I've slightly changed what I think I would like to put forward as a second recommendation. And I think this is on the basis of trying to get Cabinet to hopefully agree it. And it would be purely to say, assure benchmarking and robust testing on the 100 million headline figure and assessments of Derby Made in regards to any ongoing annual subsidy, just to ensure that work is being done. And I think that would be a pragmatic way of doing it. Councillor Kerr?
Would it maybe work to put it into the terms of impacts on the future MTFP?
Oh, sorry, I didn't get my mic on. Sorry, I had my bee in my bonnet at planning, and Councillor Bolton will be aware of this. There was a condition change, a word change in regards to the conditions of demolition, and it changed from a contract to development agreement. And people probably thought I'd lost my marbles a little bit, but I genuinely believe that that's a shift which I do worry about and increases risk. And I worry that that change has left the council potentially exposed. So on that, what I mean by that is demolition occurs, development partners go into the site, they find something they don't like, we've given them an out. Okay, that was my worry, and then we've got a site which is derelict for long term. May not happen, but I do genuinely believe it's still a risk, and I think that wording change has allowed that potentially to happen. So can I have some clarity on if there is or should be exit clauses in regards to the risks or the allocation of risk, as well as maybe consideration of financial penalties if partners walk away after demolition? And you're probably going to say that this is straying into the yes, okay.
I was just going to suggest that in terms of the detailed terms of the development agreement, that I'd suggest that's something for private session. If that's
okay, that's fine. But would again, putting this to the members, so if it was a third recommendation, would it be appropriate to say, ensure the change from contract to development agreement does not leave the council exposed? There should be clarity on exit clauses and risk allocation, as well as a consideration of financial penalties if partners walk away after demolition. I mean, I personally think that's a very robust way of approaching a business agreement. I don't think it's inappropriate to recommend that to Cabinet. I would hope that actually those kind of things will be in place. Does anyone have any strong opposition to that as a recommendation, Councillor Wilson?
I think Cabinet would be reviewing that anyway, and it's logical to. That's one of the many considerations I'm sure Cabinet will be taking into account.
So just to recap then, I think I'd like to put forward 3 recommendations. The first was the commit to ongoing scrutiny via the Regen, Vibrancy and Climate Change with access to the various business case documents, etc. Then the second one would be ensure benchmarking and robust testing of the headline figure and assessments of Derby made in terms of any annual subsidy and its impact on MTFP. Yeah. And then the third one is what we've just discussed about the ensuring that we don't leave the council exposed in contractual arrangements with regards to the wording change. So if we're happy with that, you okay? Thank you. Are there any more questions and comments before we move into private session? Councillor Eyre, sorry, I forgot you.
That's okay, thank you, Chair. I think we've covered already quite a few of the things I was going to raise, so I don't see any point in going over those ones. I don't think it's right, and I've said, as we mentioned, what Robbie's talked about before, about expanding the size of the pie. And just on when we brought Christmas to the communities plan, we talked about where we deliver the leaflets to. Should we be looking at outside the city? We shouldn't look at Borrowash and Stenson Fields and Etwall and Breadstone as being outside the city in that respect of that they're on our borders and they're important partners as we look for where people travel into the city from. Which brings me on really to the car parking strategy that's in the appendix for this document. Now, I expected quite a long-winded strategy here, and maybe I'm jumping ahead a little bit, and maybe there's more detail to flesh out on this. But the car parking strategy at the minute, I think, is about 7 lines long and reads a bit like a pipe dream to me, because it talks about how we're going to look. We're going to propose pedestrian-focused public realm. That's a good thing, and we're going to promote active travel, and that the car parking is going to be on full streets. There's the taxi drop-off area, and that we hope people will make use of the existing surrounding city centre car parks, and that's it. Which worries me a little bit, because obviously we've lost the Moorledge car park, we've lost the Assembly Rooms car park. I don't know what the long-term future of Trappel Street car park and other car parks in the city are going to be. If we're talking about massively expanding the pie that we've got, and the hope for this will be to bring in hundreds, if not thousands, if not tens of thousands of people into the city, the car is still king on the roads at the minute. We might want it to be other methods of transport. We might want it to be buses. We might want it to be push bikes. And as the cycling champion, I'd like to see a lot more people cycling. But the reality remains at the minute that the car is the king on the roads. And if people are driving in, they need somewhere to park. I don't know that we've got thousands and thousands of spare parking spaces in what we've got already to cater for people staying at hotels and all the people that we want to bring in to the city centre. What that then results in is people don't come into the city centre because they can't park. People use outer suburb car parks for park and ride, and that then sees local people pushed out of their local precincts or car parking charges introduced. I know recently places like the Meteor Centre have changed their car parking to bring charges in or put limits in and that sort of thing. Is more work going to be done on the car parking strategy to really evidence that no additional car parking spaces are needed and that we can just support Derby Works, the hotel and Derby Maid with what we've already got?
Good question.
So I believe, Councillor, you're referring to the car parking strategy section of the design and access statement. Is that correct? Yeah. So just...
And also the main document in redevelopment. I think as I searched car park in here, it's mentioned about 6 times and not once in terms of additional car parking spaces. It's all references to the multi-storey car park on the assembly room site. There's not what I thought would be in here, and maybe I said maybe I'm jumping ahead, maybe that's coming later, is around that sort of real car parking strategy of we're planning to bring thousands of additional people into the city centre. Here's how we're going to accommodate the cars that they're going to come in.
Yeah. Okay, so just to distinguish then, the information included with this report is specifically about the development site itself. It's the references that you made were the car parking strategy as part of the planning process and the design and access statement that's been submitted as part of the planning application, but also the business case here. There's a separate exercise and a separate need that I think has been discussed at Scrutiny at Regeneration Board before, about needing to look at the city centre as a whole, what car parking provision exists and what that needs to look like moving forward in order to service the needs of the city centre now and in the future. So just to be clear, they're 2 separate things. The car parking strategy references in here are not the city centre car parking strategy. They're specifically for the site redevelopment. Without looking at the detail, which I don't have in front of me, I believe what the developers have included in that design and access statement are proposals for those 3 phases and how they anticipate people would travel to and access those 3 phases using provision that exists at the moment.
Okay, so drawing to a conclusion then, I think I speak for everybody to say that residents of this city want to see progress on this site. Everybody is fed up with the stop-start nature of this. I've been heavily involved in projects which I desperately wanted to take forward, but for whatever reason we just couldn't do it. We all need to get behind a viable project, something which we can all get behind, but is not just delivers for the city, but has full scrutiny so that it's costed correctly, that all the elements line up. That's what Councillor Kerr has mentioned about ensuring that the offer is going to be right for everybody, and it's a fair mix. Hopefully this is the start of something which can move very quickly, but it needs very robust scrutiny, and we need to get this right, and we're here to help in that process. Okay, thank you. Right, we'll move on then to the item 14, which is compliance with contract and financial procedure rules. I'm really sorry you've had to wait all of this time. There's not really a way I could have bumped you up the list, to be honest, but I do apologise.
Right, thank you, Chair. So this is a small report. It asks for approval for 2 areas. The first is the procurement for services for domestic abuse and safe accommodation. And the value of this procurement is £2.5 million, which equates to £625,000 a year for 4 years, and that's why it's got to go to Cabinet. In addition, the report recommends delegating approval to the Strategic Director of Communities and Place in consultation with the Section 151 officer and the Cabinet member for communities to award the domestic abuse contracts. For context, a few examples of safe accommodation include refuge accommodation, specialist safe accommodation and sanctuary schemes. Domestic abuse support in this context means support for victims and their children who live in the relevant accommodation. If you look at section 4.1.3 of the report, it defines the meaning of the support and outlines some examples of this. And funding for this procurement is now included in the local government finance settlement. So shall I go on to the next one? Yeah? Yeah. So the next item is funding for an addition of 2 play zone schemes at Dale Road and Stockbrook Recreation Ground to the capital programme. Play zones are a modern, safe and engaging facility. They are designed for recreational football and at least one other sport. The council has bid for this funding, and this bid was below the threshold for cabinet approval and has been actioned under delegated powers. This report is to approve the acceptance of the funding and add the schemes to the capital programme. The 2 new schemes total £624,000, £312,000 for each scheme. The premise of play zones is that they are financially sustainable facilities allowing for income to be generated through a pay and play system. Thank you.
Thank you. One quick question from me then. Is there a mechanism there for the revenue to be, some of that revenue to be on ongoing upkeep, improvements and refreshing as we move forward? How is that going to be resolved? Because what we don't want is the facilities in a few years' time to start getting issues and there's no money there for them to be for the upkeep.
Yes, Chair, good question. Yeah, that is the premise of a play zone, that they are financially sustainable, so any revenue income that we're getting will be reinvested into those kind of areas.
That's good to know. Are there any other queries, questions? Councillor Wright.
Well, it's exactly the same question that you asked, Chair. In Chadderton East, we've got a multi-use game area, which we've had. There is no ongoing maintenance fund allowance for, so it got into a total state of disrepair, and it's taken a lot of remedial action, and it wasn't very thought through around things like litter facilities, etc. So it's led to all sorts of issues in terms of council process and procedure. So while it's reassuring to hear that ongoing maintenance is going to be, and it will cover issues that I've just mentioned. Could you confirm that, then?
I don't know if it'll cover litter. I will have to go back to the servicing and get back to you on that. I think it would be more about maintenance, but they are supposed to be financially sustainable, so there should be something in the plan for that, but that might be already on the sites, or might be on the sites already for these 2, so I'll just get some more details for you.
I think one way to do that, if we can, is it's a bit like having latitude really with 106. Sometimes it's very ring-fenced and very specific, and if there's a little bit of wording in there to allow a little bit of sort of latitude on other issues, a little bit more broadly, that's a very positive thing, because it won't not just about the nuts and bolts and the repainting and all the rest of it. It can be just a few other things around there. So that might be a useful addition if there is that ability to open up the revenue to be spent on maybe a slightly wider remit. Councillor Kerr?
It's the same point, Chair, which I think is a very important one. And under the 6.2, it talks about Stockbrook and the existing mugger, which I think has been in for probably something in the order of 15 years, which it's now saying it's effectively end of life, probably because it hasn't had that ongoing maintenance. So the ongoing situation for this, I think, is absolutely vital. But we're putting something in the order of 60,000, I think, into each of these. And I just wonder whether actually putting 60,000 into repairing the existing mugger would bring it back up to a practical, usable standard, because this is only paying 75% of the costs. And I just wondered whether this had actually been assessed.
So you're asking if we used our portion of the funding that we're using for match funding would be enough to bring them up to a state of good repair rather than having a new facility?
this is committing us to be, this is expecting us to be spending £60,000-ish each on the 2 new facilities. One of them would be replacing an existing facility. If we can spend £60,000 and bring the existing facility up to a good standard, then potentially we could find another £60,000 and put the new one somewhere else where it's deserving, rather than throwing away something that needs the same amount of money to be spent on it. And I don't know whether these ideas have been explored and there's a reason why we're not doing it or not.
Thank you. Yeah, a good question. If you go to 7.2, we are using 2 lots of Section 106 to match fund this, and we are using £76,000 of the Parks Rolling Programme. Is that what you're saying? So can we use the £76,000 in a different way rather than using it for match funding?
Before you come in there, Councillor Kerr, I think Councillor Bonds is keen to contribute.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Just to clarify, the existing court at Stockbrook is unusable and it wouldn't be able to be repaired because the problem is related to tree roots, which have destroyed the ground in those courts. So unless we want to take all the trees out and move that, then this is the viable option. And also it will be bigger and better and very much welcomed by the community.
I'll take the questions back and I'll give you some updated information and email it round.
I think the ideal situation would be obviously this investment very welcome. More investment elsewhere would be even more welcome. And I think it's a bit like the parks funding, isn't it? Sometimes there's specific projects. But, there's a lot more to do than just necessarily the projects in one particular capital year. So, maybe take it offline and we can have a discussion about it. Thank you. Right, any more questions, comments? No, moving on. Right, I won't waffle with the exemption. We'll thank everybody. The regular meeting's now closed and we'll move on to the exempt section. Thank you.